Hello everyone, welcome to Tips and Joy. My name is Ayo and I share interview and career tips as well as Scrum Master tips. Today I'll be talking about the sprint planning session and there will be a live demo using JIRA, which is the most popular tool used in Scrum. If you haven't subscribed, please hit the subscribe button. That way the YouTube algorithm pushes my video out to more people. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share with your friends and family. Let's jump right into it. The sprint planning session is one of the 4 Scrum events recommended by the Scrum Guide. Now, I know there's a 5th one, the backlog refinement session. Although it's not in the Scrum Guide, many people have adopted it because it just helps them plan ahead and plan for the coming sprint. Now, back to the sprint planning session. The purpose of the sprint planning session is to plan out the work for that entire sprint. Prior to the sprint planning session, the product owner will have prioritized the backlog items, putting them in the order of priority from the highest to the least priority. And then at the sprint planning session, the product owner or the Scrum team might have invited people that can help them, probably add more information or get some more clarity for the user stories that they plan to work on during that particular sprint. Now, this is one of the reasons why people also have the product backlogs refinement session, because we're planning ahead for the next sprint. We will have talked about all the tickets that we're planning to bring into the next sprint, and then ask as many questions. The development team or the Scrum team will have an idea on what they want to achieve prior to that sprint planning day. If the product backlog session is done properly, if the product backlog refinement session is done properly, it usually makes the sprint planning session very fast. So on the sprint planning day, there are 3 inputs to a good sprint planning session, 3 major inputs. First of all is the prioritized product backlog, we have the sprint velocity, and we have the sprint capacity. Like I said, there are other inputs, but these are just 3 major inputs that I think are very important for any sprint planning session. So the first one, like I said, is the prioritized product backlog. The product owner will have prioritized the backlog items, and the product owner can work with the Scrum Master. It depends on how knowledgeable they have about doing all these things. And it's the Scrum Master's duty to also assist the product owner and also coach the product owner on the Scrum framework. After that, we have the sprint capacity. The sprint capacity is the available hours the Scrum team has to deliver this particular project. This excludes day offs. This excludes public holidays within that particular sprint. So if your sprint is between a 2-week period, we're looking at the days off within that 2-week period. And also this some people also exclude like the breaks, and it depends on how deep you want to go into detail. So that's how you calculate your sprint capacities, the available hours the team has to work on the work for that particular sprint. And then the last one is the velocity. It's usually called average velocity. It's usually an average of the past performance of the team. The other inputs to the sprint planning session could be the acceptance criteria and the definition of done. Well, they're also important inputs, but I'm assuming this has already been clarified and resolved if you have done a product backlog refinement session. So the acceptance criteria prior to the sprint planning session, like I said, if you have done a backlog refinement session, all the entire Scrum team will have reviewed each user story they are planning to bring for the upcoming sprint. And then they would have ensured that the description is clear, the acceptance criteria is clear, everybody understands what is required and what the expected output is. And also the definition of done, like we all know what we need to do for each user story to be considered as done. So many people have, some people have, different steps they have, laid out for the development team or the Scrum team to know that this user story is now done. For most people, is the code must be reviewed. For example, in some teams, they need 2 reviews to be able to classify this story as being reviewed. They need 2 reviews, probably from a senior and a junior software developer. And also after review, the the user story must include the right components that it will be deployed to. The user story must also be tested. So after it has been developed, it has been reviewed, it must be tested, and if it passes the test, then it can be considered as done. Many people have also used JIRA to automate the process. So their user stories move from ready, depends on how you have labeled your columns, from ready to in progress to in review to in test, and then it can then move to done if it passes the test process. So that's all that, that's all that needs to be done for a definition of done. Now, different teams define it in different ways. I've just given an example. Also, in that backlog refinement session, the stories will have also been estimated depending on, how you do your estimation. Many people use the planning poker method. So depending on how you do your estimation. So you're starting to see that it's kind of important to have that backlog refinement session, because it usually makes the sprint planning session very fast. During that backlog refinement session, the user story and the acceptance criteria, everything is clear, and the development team, all the scrum team, they're confident about that user story, that they can actually develop that particular feature. And also, your definition of done, you've resolved that, you have mentioned it to the team, they have agreed, and we're ready to move forward. So by the time you get to the sprint planning session, you have everything you need. So during that sprint planning session, you once again just review each user story. In case there were any pending questions, answer those pending questions. Like I said, the scrum team might bring somebody that, can provide clarity to some things that, that are not clear at that particular point. They will clarify everything. I strongly advise that, before you bring any tickets, any user stories into the particular sprint, ensure that, they are clear. Ensure that it's not during the particular sprint that you're now gathering requirements. That delays the progress of work. And, that doesn't even meet the definition of ready to be brought into the sprint. So let's avoid that. Ensure that we have all the details we need before we bring any user stories into the particular sprint. The purpose of the sprint planning session is to answer 3 questions. The first one is, why is this sprint valuable? At the beginning of the sprint planning session, the product owner will give us a rough statement on what he hopes the scrum team can achieve during this particular sprint. The second question is, what can be done? Like, what can be done to achieve this, sprint plan or sprint goal the product owner initially has in mind. So the development team or the scrum team will select the product backlog items that will help them achieve this goal. The development team will select the product backlog items that will help them achieve this sprint goal or this rough idea that the product owner has in mind. And then the last question is, how can this be done? So after selecting the user stories, the user stories from the prioritized product backlog that they believe will be able to help them achieve this particular goal, then the development team will decide on how they can get it done. So it might mean that they might need to raise new tasks. There might be some technical tasks that they also need to do in order to get this done. So they will put all of this together, all the user stories they have together, considering the velocity from the previous sprint and the capacity they have for this particular sprint. After considering the velocity, the average velocity, and the capacity, then they can now select the work items they might bring. They can bring into that particular sprint. Now, this might differ from what they initially planned because they have to consider their capacity and their velocity. So it means that at this point, when we have the work items or the user stories that fit into our capacity, that our capacity can accommodate and is also in line with our velocity, then the entire scrum team that can come together to develop a sprint goal. A sprint goal is a statement used to describe the purpose of that particular sprint. So like I said, at the beginning of the sprint, the product owner has a rough idea, but towards the end, considering all the necessary items like the capacity and the velocity, then they can select the work items that they believe they can complete within that particular sprint, and they can come up with a sprint goal. Now, those work items or the user stories that have made the list at the end of the sprint planning session, they are now put into a sprint they're now put into a sprint backlog. So that's what we call the sprint backlog. So there's the product backlog, which contains all the work items, and that's what gets prioritized. And there's a sprint backlog, which is just the work items that will be completed within that particular sprint. And that sprint could be, between 2 to 4 weeks. So the major outputs of a sprint is number one, the sprint goal, which the entire team comes together to develop at the end of the sprint planning session, and the sprint backlog. Now there are other outputs, but like I said, the major outputs are the sprint goal and the sprint backlog. After this has been done, the team can now start the sprint and start working. So I'll show a live demo using JIRA on how to go about the sprint planning session. If you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button, like and share with your friends and family. Before I jump into the live demo using JIRA, some people also find it difficult creating a sprint goal, especially when they are working on different projects within a particular sprint, or they have some project user stories they're working on, and maybe some bugs and tasks from another project, or they're not just related. I know this is not ideal according to the Scrum guide, but I'm trying to describe a real life situation that I've seen many people, including myself, fall into. Now this work items, user stories, or bugs, they have been prioritized by the product owner, and then they want them to fix the bugs or develop these features together within a particular sprint. So what people do or what I've seen people do in order to come up with a sprint goal in this kind of situation, I think the product owner has to decide on the most important item. Now, the goal of every sprint is to complete out the work for that particular sprint, complete out all the user stories or bugs or features, whatever, in that particular sprint, because we have used our capacity and our velocity to determine what we can complete within that sprint, within that 2 to 4 week period. So the sprint goal could be the most important item, the most important feature that we're planning to complete, and that could be the sprint goal. Doesn't mean that all the other items will not be completed. No, like I said, the purpose of the sprint is to complete all the work for that particular sprint. Why is it the most important item? The sprint goal could be the most important item in that particular sprint backlog, just because in case, for example, something happens, let's say somebody unexpectedly fall ill, or they realize there's some issues that they cannot quickly resolve, with that being the sprint goal, then at that part, if they have that kind of situation, they can then focus on that particular ticket or that particular feature to ensure that it is being resolved, which means that all others might lag behind because of this unexpected situation. So now the sprint goal will then focus on the most important features. It doesn't mean, and this is something that the Scrum Master has to keep on saying to the Scrum team, if you're in this kind of situation, it doesn't mean other items will not be worked on. No, it just means that in case of an emergency, in case we have to quickly pick one ticket and ensure that this group of tickets or this whole ticket is what is completed, then that's the sprint goal. We have to focus on that and get it done. I've also seen some people write out almost all the tickets in the sprint goal. Ideally, that shouldn't be so. Ideally, the team should be working on a project so that you can easily, come up with a sprint goal and tie all the user stories together to come up with a sprint goal, which shows what you're trying to achieve in that particular sprint. So, there might be, different scenarios on, how you come about this, but work with your team on what you all decide is best for that particular team. I've just explained how I've seen different people, resolve this kind of situation whereby it seems like you're working on disjointed user stories or projects all at the same time. So welcome to the live demo of the sprint planning session using JIRA. JIRA is one of the most important tools used in ticket management, in project management as well. And I'm using the free version, so you might notice that some features are missing. And also, I would advise anyone that's just starting out to sign up for the JIRA free version. I think it's for a couple of days so that you can practice on everything you will need to kind of succeed in your new role, whether as a project manager or as a scrum master or whatever role you're doing. JIRA is a very important tool to learn, especially as a scrum master, because it's one of the most popular tools used. So at the beginning of the sprint planning session, the purpose of the planning session is to plan out the work for that particular sprint. The first question is what are we trying to achieve in this particular sprint? So the product owner comes up with a plan or a rough idea of what is hoping the team can achieve. This is the prioritized product backlog, and after the product owner has expressed what they're planning to achieve, then the team then decides on what they can do to get this done. So they might decide that, okay, if we work on this first I think there are 5 tickets here, maybe first 5 tickets we would be able to accomplish this plan that the product owner has. But then again, they still have to consider their capacity and their velocity. I've given the definitions of the capacity and velocity, so you can rewatch it if you're still not clear on what it is. You can go back to the beginning of this video, and then considering the capacity and the velocity, they know that their forecasted velocity is just 17. So it might be that at this particular time, maybe they have to bring this out for now in order to consider their capacity and velocity. I'm just trying to refresh to get everything set. So initially they thought they could do all of this, but now they might have to bring this out, maybe just because they feel like with this they can still get the feature that they need to do. Or it might mean that, we might need to rephrase the sprint goal, or educate the product owner, letting him know like this is what can be achieved based on the capacity and the velocity of our previous sprints. So after they've done that, they will now have to come up with a sprint goal, which comprises of what they're planning to achieve within this particular sprint. So based on all these user stories here, what are we trying to achieve? Then you click on that, click on start the sprint. Some people put names for their teams, like some of my teams, we have very nice names, maybe Avengers, or things that we're watching on Netflix. We have different names for our sprint. The duration could be 2 to 4 weeks, and then the start date and the end date, and then we have our sprint goal. So here, this sprint goal is crafted based on what we have selected that will be taken in for this sprint, which is based on these 4 user stories here, which is selected based on the prioritized product backlog and the plan from the product owner, and also the capacity and the velocity. So I'll put a sprint goal. So for example, it could be to create a new account feature. And when I click on start the sprint, so it automatically opens up the sprint backlog, which is the list of tickets that we'll be working on within that particular sprint. And here we have the sprint goal as well. Here there are the different columns, and you can definitely change this. This is just what is included here in this free trial. I think you can add more boards here when you go to configure board. You can add more columns when you go to configure board. So most teams, they usually have it to do or to do, in progress, in review, then in test before it moves to done. So they've used JIRA to automate that definition of done process. And this is how we'll go about the sprint planning session. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you very much for staying tuned. If you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button. If you're planning to become a Scrum Master in 2023 with little to no experience, watch this video out here. It would really, really help you. Also, if you want to find out about a Scrum Master, what a Scrum Master does, a day in the life of a Scrum Master, I also have another video here. And also, if you're being asked, what are the Scrum events, all the Scrum events, and how to say it in an interview setting, I also have another video here. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you. Bye.